Hello and welcome to episode number 47 of the Know Your Physio podcast. I'm your host, Preschel, helping you discover your science to optimize your life, health, and performance. And today's guest is Greg Bennett. He's one of the most accomplished athletes of all time, and certainly one of the most accomplished athletes alive today, and definitely the most accomplished athlete that I've ever had on my podcast. Greg is a former Olympic triathlete. He's now a motivational speaker, corporate trainer, entrepreneur, and we take you through the journey of his life, what it took to become the best at what he does, at what he did as a triathlete, what the mindset was like, what it taught him about his career post triathlon, and we go deep on the science of visualization, how you can train without training, what it feels like to set yourself apart as an athlete in terms of talent, hard work, and opportunity. We talked about resilience, early life experience, and how it can shape the characteristic of resilience. How, I want to leave the rest for the show. This is really just such an inspiring show that really puts you in the mind of a professional athlete and someone that is simply the best at what they do. So even if you're not a fan of triathlon, believe me, you're going to take a lot from this episode in terms of grit, resilience, and being the best at whatever it is that you do. We go deep on what it takes. So thanks to Greg for joining us. I found out through the podcast, and you'll soon hear, I found out that he actually lives here in Florida, in South Florida. And so we'll be doing another episode in the near future in person. So let us know if there's any questions that you have, any topics that you want to make sure we cover. It would be our pleasure to discuss them. So anyway, hope you guys enjoy, and we'll see you on the other side. Greg, here we are. Welcome to the Know Your Physio podcast. It's an honor to have you here with us. I really want to dig into all things, athletic mindset, endurance, podcasting, so many different topics that I want to pick apart. And this is typically not the case with my guests. I typically have a bit of an introduction prepared, but you have such a rich history as a motivational speaker, as an athlete. You've done so much. I figured the best way to do this and to really do it justice, if you could sort of take us through some of the incredible competitive lifestyle that you've maintained and the kind of things that you've accomplished as a triathlete. So not my typical introduction, but welcome to the show. Honor to have you here with us. And if you could take us through your pedigree.
I'm very honored to be here. So, and I guess I can give a quick rundown of, my past life and my life currently. I'm originally Australian, as you can probably tell by my accent. Now living in South Florida, and as we just said pre-show, we're only an hour and a half apart, and we're like, we should have done this in person, but that's for a future date. We'll do a follow-up.
There we go.
But I found the sport of triathlon when I was about 14, 15 in the mid-'80s. By the late 80s, I had was racing professionally. I still went to university and did a couple of degrees, but during that study, I was still racing professionally. And then I continued racing professionally for 27 years and retired when I was 44. A couple of Olympic Games and a few world titles later, the body had kind of said, that's enough. And I feel incredibly grateful for being able to follow my passion and get everything out of myself, squeeze every little bit I could out of myself, physically, mentally, emotionally, the whole lot in that 27-year period. And so when I retired in 2016, kind of took a bit of a hiatus, to be honest, for about 6 months, almost like a mini retirement, a half-life retirement. Yeah, and it was, I did some coaching then for a year or so and realized coaching, as much as I kind of enjoyed it, I just didn't get the true, being an athlete, there's something about that's just raw and real and exciting, and coaching wasn't doing it for me. I actually started my podcast in 2019, and just like you, just wanted to learn from the best and get the great thought leaders of the world on my platform and have conversations with them. And for the most part, it's somewhat of a triathlon podcast because that was the low-hanging fruit. I could reach out to great triathletes and coaches. But I've really enjoyed the conversations with entertainers and entrepreneurs and doctors and alike, a bit like your show, just trying to learn from the best. And we were talking pre-show about how much we've both been able to grow and learn just by having this weekly conversation with exceptional people. It really is a fascinating place to learn and grow. And since that podcast, this last sort of 6 to 12 months, I've taken a role with a company called Any Question, which is an app that basically was designed because someone was listening to my podcast and thought, well, why can't I ask the world's great thought leaders questions? That guy's name is Ed Baker, who was the head of growth at Facebook and then became the head of growth, a little ride-sharing app called Uber, and built that to what it was. And then he's now my business partner in building this new app called Any Question. So it's amazing how, when you put yourself out there, there's a vulnerability to doing a podcast and it's a little nerve-wracking. I don't know about you, but you get a little bit nervous and you don't know, where you're going. But I think that it's amazing how the world can offer up certain things if you just put yourself out there and you keep moving. So that's my life in a nutshell. We can probably get into a bit more detail on different phases of that journey, but I just want to give you a bit of a recap.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is not typical for me. I typically don't pull up like my guests have, X degree here, X degree there. Maybe they want this, they want that, but you have over 500 wins. 500.
No, not 500.
No, 100 wins and 500 races.
Yeah,
over 100
right,
wins.
Yeah.
Like this is. I mean, I'm looking at this like there's like a Wikipedia here. This is unbelievable. I mean, it's and then your wife. You guys are the world's fittest couple. So it's like it's
maybe another lifetime ago.
No, it's unbelievable, and it's so cool to hear that this has been such an immense that the podcasting has been such an immense outlet for growth, considering how much you've grown just in your being an athlete. One question that I have for you is, you mentioned earlier you kind of recognized that you had enough, and how did you recognize that? Was it your body telling you that you had enough? Was it the people around you telling you had enough? Was it an age thing? How did you know when enough was enough?
That's a really good question, and it's probably a bit of all of those things, to be honest. I think, look, I think I won my last big race in 2013, I think 2014, and I was 41, 42. And the body was still going pretty well, but I did notice the next couple of years after that, my run speed just started tapping out a little bit, and it was taking me a lot more to get out and do the consistent work. To the point, I had a laugh once with a friend of mine, Hunter Kemper, who's one of America's greatest triathletes. I think he's got like 7 or 10 US national titles, but a really good guy. And we were both sitting on the pre-race press conference, and he said, "Greg, what's your morning routine to get out the door to train?" I'm like, well, I often sit in an Epsom salt bath or a hot bath, and then I do some rollers, and then I do some light PNF stretching with my wife, Laura. And then I'll go and do a 3 to 5K warm-up jog, and then kind of do a little bit more loosening up before I do whatever my main workout's going to be. It was such a process just to get the body warmed up and moving again before I could do anything of, quality type work. And he just laughed, and it was that kind of, I was becoming the old man of the sport to some degree, and it was taking a lot more in terms of body maintenance to keep it going. And the one thing I always loved was I loved what they would call the hard work, the going all out in the swimming, the biking and running, and the speed and the endurance and the almost the what you'd call the suffering side. Maybe I'm a bit sadistic, but
masochist.
Yeah, I love that. And what I didn't love was doing all the little things. So doing all the rollers and doing the stretching and doing the baths and doing the ice bath recovery, and that stuff started to weigh up. And I always said passion's the first thing to go. And when your passion goes, everything goes, right? Your body starts falling apart because you stop doing the little things right. You don't perform as well because suddenly traveling to races isn't as much fun or whatever it was. And so it was kind of a snowballing effect that the passion to do the little things wasn't there. And the results then started to suffer in my second to last year. And then I did one more year where I only raced maybe 4 to 5 times. And there was no wins. In fact, I had some big leads off the bike and even got run down. And it was just kind of like, hang on, the run's meant to be my strength. And it was like, okay, it's time to step aside. And like Laura said, my wife, and I'll probably refer to her throughout this conversation because she really has been my rock. She's like, Greg, you've had your turn. It's time to let somebody else have it. And when you get that mindset, you've had your turn. You get to. Even my brother said it once. He said, you work so hard for so long. It's like you get to rent being the best in the world just for a moment in time. And I
Wow.
said, that's exactly it. You never own it. It's like you get to rent it for a split moment, and then there's somebody better, faster comes along, or your body breaks down, whatever it is. And so that was it for me. In 2016, when I was 44, it was like, okay, I got to retire on my own terms, but that passion had just started to wane, and it was time.
Wow. And, you brought up something that really struck me was when you said the passion goes first. And I'm wondering if this concept was something that you discovered through triathlon or if you had been familiar with this previous to triathlon, or if it's someone else. Like, how did you uncover that? How did you know that the concept of passion going first was like the red flag?
For me, it was because I'm a very passionate type person, and my drive to success and the drive to get more out of life and to keep pursuing, always, I knew it came from this deep down desire to do something special. I look at life that we get this short amount of time on this planet, that we all have an end, and we don't know when that end's going to be, which makes life kind of exciting. But it's kind of, I want to squeeze as much out of life as I can. And when you have that kind of mindset and you wake up with that every single day, that this could be my last day, let's give it a good crack. And then I've been able to channel that kind of mindset into the area of swim, bike, run, triathlon. That I love the people, I love the pushing myself, I love the racing, I loved everything about it. So I was truly passionate about everything involved in it. That I knew, because I was that kind of person, that when the passion starts to wane, and I knew there'd be a point, I kept waiting. I mean, I was getting pretty old and I was still loving it. And I thought it, eventually, and it did. It finally, I was actually almost relieved when my passion started to wane. And it was almost like I've ticked every box that I could have hoped to have done. Well, not every, that's not true. There's things on my resume I'd love to have added, but it was definitely, if you'd asked 17-year-old Greg, would you want this career? I would have said 100% yes. It was, I had some regrets, but not massive. And so, yeah, the passion, like I said, it finally went. I just knew that I was that kind of person that when that stopped, I was in trouble.
And do you find that the people that you surrounded yourself with in triathlon, that they did it for a similar reason or it was a similar passion? Did you notice a similar sort of personality?
No, I think everybody's very different. Like, we're all individuals. I think some people, a lot of people get thrust into things because they have tremendous talent and ability, and they find themselves being very successful, for whatever success means to them. But they're fairly successful and they're actually not passionate about what they're doing, but they feel like they have to do it. I mean, Andre Agassi is a great example of that, the tennis player of the 80s and 90s. I mean, the guy was phenomenal, but hated tennis. But he was good at it, and that's what he'd spent his life doing. And so he had this real struggle with doing something. I think we're all very different in the way we approach it. Even my wife, who became one of the greatest female triathletes in the world, and she was very different to me. She's very analytical and very factual. She really manages her emotions very well, and whereas I'm a bit more all over the place, and I feel like, depending on your emotional character, it almost determines how passionate you can be about things and how it affects you. So yeah, it took me a lot to manage my ego, manage my expectations, all of these things that can be generated when you're too passionate. It took me a lot to try and find that let's not go too high, let's not go too low. Took me a long time.
So I have a lot of questions now pertaining to the ego and the passion because it brings up things for me. But before I get there, I want to ask you, I mean, I'll put it this way. Maybe I've had the luck of the draw as far as the triathletes that I've met are all very like vibrant people. Like they're alive, they really are alive. And it's sort of like, well, I guess they have to have this kind of life to them if they're going to be running for hours on end and really punishing their bodies this way. But it's like, I'm wondering if that's been the case with you and the people that you've seen in the triathlete community. Like when they're on their off time, are they exhausted, or are they these vibrant people, considering the nature of the work they're doing?
I love this because I think probably my number one thing that I love most about the sport of triathlon are the people. Now, whether they're amateur or age group, we call them, or professionals, you'll find that everybody in it is just trying to get more out of life. At the end of the day, to swim, bike, and run to exhaustion is kind of nuts, right? I mean, it really is kind of nuts, but it's a way that you're able to peer into yourself. They're people that, like I said at the start of this sentence, it was basically they're just trying to get more out of life. Like I've got life, I'm enjoying it, but there's got to be more. And I love that, peering over the edge. And sometimes we step too far and we fall off the edge. But it's I think when you have that kind of community and they all come together, it's a very bonding experience. There's the nerves pre-race, and it's like, it's incredibly nerve-wracking when an example would be the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon, where they send 2,000 people out in a ferry and you're jumping off the side of the ferry right next to the Alcatraz, and you're swimming ashore the 2 kilometers or 1.25 miles. But the energy on that boat,
Man.
it's absolutely extraordinary. Towards my end of the career, I wasn't a super aroused state, but when you're on a boat with 2,000 amateurs and everybody's, it's a really special moment. And then the flip side of that is when you finish the race, good, bad, or ugly, you finish the race, the stories that come through, and almost a celebration that you've all been into battle and back together, and you survived.
The camaraderie to it.
And that's very, very special with this kind of endurance community, because it's not just triathlon, running and cycling, they all kind of have it. And I think that's what I thoroughly enjoyed, very, very much.
And let me ask you something. For the people that are tuning in that have no idea what a triathlete or a triathlon even is, how can you break down the distances? I think it's important towards the beginning of the podcast, just to paint the picture for folks who are not familiar.
Yeah, so really a triathlon, firstly, in its simplest form, is swim, bike, run in that order, and you do them in one race, and you transition between each of them as fast as you can. They vary in distance, anywhere from very, very short, what we would call super sprints, where you might find even at your local YMCA or anywhere, indoor races and things, where it might be a 200 meter or a couple of 100-yard swim onto a sort of 5 mile bike, or whatever. 8 kilometer bike, and then you could do a little 2 mile run or 1 mile run, whatever, off it. So anything like that can be called a triathlon. It doesn't have to be a set distance for it to be called a triathlon. Starting there, then you work up and you might get to something like the Olympic distance, is what they call it, which is the distance that's in the Olympic Games. And that's a 1,500 meter swim, 40 kilometer bike, 10 kilometer run, or just shy of a 1 mile swim, 24 something point whatever miles on the bike, and then a 6.2 mile run. And then you'll go up in distances from there. There's a half Ironman and a full Ironman, which is a full Ironman in metric is 3.8 kilometer swim, 180 kilometer bike, and then a 42.2 kilometer marathon run. So a half Ironman is also, exactly half those distances. They range basically from anywhere from a 20-minute event all the way up to those sort of 8-9 hours for the professionals. And, for the amateurs that are doing Ironman, they sometimes go up to 17 hours. So really a full day event for most people.
And you competed in all of these distances, or most of them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I competed in all of them. Ironman was not my forte. That was not the thing that I was known for. I did a couple right at the end of my career just to tick some boxes.
You won 6 of those?
No, I won the 70. The half Ironmans I did again. Basically, what I did was focus on the Olympic distance in the World Series and the Olympics for about 10 to 15 years. Then I transitioned to the US, and there's 2 different types of Olympic distance. One's called drafting and one's called non-drafting. What I mean by that is, in one style, you can slipstream on the bike, and the other, they force you to be 10 to 20 meters apart. and not be able to slipstream and save energy on the bike. So the first part of my career was probably focused on the drafting style, the slipstreaming style, which is what's used in the World Triathlon Series. And the second part of my career, I really focused on the non-drafting or the individual format, which there was a big professional series in the US that's why I transitioned my career over to the US with pretty big prize money that I really wanted to do well at. And then towards the end of my career, once I was about 40, I switched over and started doing some longer ones, the half Ironmans.
Right. So
I
the
think I
half
did about
Ironman is the 70.3. That's where I made the
That's right,
mistake.
70.3.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what is that? 1.9 kilometer swim, 90 kilometer bike, and a half marathon, 21 kilometer run. Generally just under 4 hours, somewhere between sort of 3 hours 45 and 4 hours for the win. And I did maybe 15 of those. I think I actually had about a 50% winning rate, but I didn't actually enjoy them. I often crossed the line and just went, yeah, I'm glad that's over. So
Wow, really?
talking about passion, it didn't do a lot for me. Don't get me wrong, I was grateful for the win and if the body showed up, but it didn't have that oomph that I enjoyed in the shorter racing, which was a lot more head to head, a bit more of a tussle. If you won by 30 seconds in a short race, that was a long way. Whereas the 70.3s, you could win by a couple of minutes, and it just wasn't. It was more about you and less about racing others, and I kind of enjoyed the racing others.
And let me ask you something. As far as, if you're racing for hours on end, what is going through your mind? Are you thinking about your time? Are you thinking about your body? Are you thinking about what you have to do the next day? What were some typical themes? And were there any lessons that you learned during the races that you otherwise didn't really expect?
Well, I think first and foremost, every single race you are learning, whether you're winning or losing. In fact, you probably learned a lot more from the races that you lost in, especially if you felt you were prepared and really thought you were going to get to have a good race and you didn't. There was a lot of learning there. But the mindset, throughout every single race would be different. I mean, it's a different mindset if you're chasing compared to leading a race, and the anxiety that comes with leading is actually quite stressful. And so you're trying to, in those instances, especially when it comes to anxiety of leading a race, you're trying to just break it down and think very rationally and factually about, okay, get to the next aid station, grab some water, what's the time gap? Okay, I got a 30-second lead with 3 kilometers to go. Okay, that means every kilometer I can afford 10 seconds that they'd have to make up. But if I can hold it at 30 seconds gap for another, kilometer, well, then they've got to make up 30 seconds in 2 kilometers, and that's going to be really difficult for them. And then, I was very mathematical, especially under duress. I found math to be a great place to just take yourself out of emotional thinking. It became very factual. And even things like just counting, I would count on the bike a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I do 8 sets of 8, just really crunching on those pedals with everything, but focusing on the counting. Running was much the same, especially if I was running up a steep hill or something and it felt slow, you're just getting to count. And that, for me, was a nice way to just take yourself away from the pain or worrying about others on the race course. And they were nice little tricks and tools that I always, tapped into. But I also, and we can go into this a bit later if you like, but I practiced loads of visualizing. I mean, I was very natural at always visualizing, or you could call it daydreaming to some degree, but I became quite good at grabbing that daydreaming and becoming very analytical with it and planning my
Just
visual.
during the race or before a race?
No, before. Usually in my training, either physical visualizing, so in my training workouts, or static, where I'd be lying in bed or on a massage table. I would go through every kind of circumstance and situation I could possibly think of. And, I'm such a big believer in, what you think has a direct impact on your physiology that I spent a lot of time doing that. I'd like to say I was doing that well before it almost became trendy.
Did you discover it
I
yourself or did someone teach
Yeah,
you?
yeah, I found it very empowering. In fact, I was almost too good at visualizing that, Laura used to say it wouldn't let me visualize in sort of December, January, February because I'd be going too hard in my training, because I could hear the commentators in my head. I could hear the athletes
Wow.
breathing on my shoulders. And I'd go too hard too soon in training. And, with it being a long year, Laura used to say, you're not allowed to start visualizing until March 15 or whatever. And it was true. It was like, I found it so empowering that it often got in the way of just consistent good training without trying to have great workouts early on in the year.
That's interesting. It's like a lot of people, like their significant other will give them shit about what they do or what they say, and it's like you're getting shit about what you think or what you might be thinking or imagining. You know what I mean? That's
Well, she has to deal with
when
me
you
when
when
I'm
you
broken or injured because I've gone out too hard for a year. So she's just protecting herself from later on.
oh my goodness, only between triathletes. That's amazing. So one thing I wanted to ask is as far as your unique advantage, right? Because you're objectively, I mean, legendary in this world and forever will be. And it's like, was your unique advantage these tools, tips, and tricks that you had discovered, or was it a genetic advantage or your training? Like, what did you feel really set you apart?
Oh, that's a big question to unwrap. Well, first and foremost, I probably had some talent. I'm not going to shy
Uh,
away from that. I'm not one of
of
these people to
course.
sit here and say I didn't have a little bit of talent. Obviously, I think I had a reasonable VO2 max, and I could sit
What
at
what
a.
was your VO2 max out of curiosity?
Oh, I think it was like 78. I don't
Oof.
think I ever got over 80, but I only got tested when I was really little. Well, really little, 21, 22, whatever. And I remember doing a test actually. They were testing a lot of Aussies. This is before Sydney got the Olympics even, but I think they wanted to get Australian athletes into the right sort of sports. And they said, Greg, we're going to send you down to Adelaide to go to the institute down there with cycling. You should be on the track doing the 4,000 pursuit cycling. And, because, we think we can train you up and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I don't want to be a cycler. I want to be a triathlete. And so it was funny because years later, the athletes that came out of that institute program included like Robbie McEwen, Stuart O'Grady, Brad McGee, some of the biggest names in cycling you could ever imagine. Like they took on the world, and we can talk about this later, but the kind of training they were doing, for a 4K pursuit race on the track, they were riding 1,000, kilometers a week. Just crazy kind of work. And I did the same kind of crazy work in triathlon. But, so for me, yes, there was some natural talent. I grew up in a sports mad family. My older brother played professional rugby for a number of years post high school. He's the real athlete. He could turn on a dime, could run, had absolutely fearless. I didn't get that at all. I'm not fearless like him, but he would tackle a monster guy on the wing, just running him down. And so I came from a family where, firstly, we were sports mad. Secondly, my mum and dad really encouraged us to go see the world and say yes to every opportunity out there. We were privileged in the sense that I could go out and explore the world and challenge myself and always know I could come home and there'd be a bed for me. And for me, that's the ultimate privilege to have, parents that love you and there's a bed if you fail big time and then allow you to reboot. And I was given that opportunity. And, even when I did have my first full-time professional year after university, I actually had some injuries and the money wasn't rolling in and it was tough. And it was nice to be able to come home and, I was waiting tables and everything and I pay mum and dad rent that kind of way, but it was still way cheaper than living on my own. And, I was 23 at the time and they were still letting me, crash at their house. And that for me, I don't take for granted. I felt very privileged for that. And then I think the next phase is I joined a coach by the name of Brett Sutton, and Brett had this old school kind of philosophy of training that was, very, very big work, a lot of interval work broken up. And I embraced that kind of work. I actually loved it. And I would see other athletes in the training squad that were in, complaining or moaning. And I would get tired, but I kind of loved the thrill of trying to see what I could do and every single day. And I don't know, maybe it was ego or whatever else. I never wanted to shy away from that. I kind of wanted to always be put on a brave face and just dive into it. And I think because I embraced that really, really hard work, I learnt to work very, very hard. Now, that was great, but it also made me very, very tired. And during that period, I don't think I probably got the performances that I should have because I left a lot of it in training. So I had to learn a lot from that and grow from going, this sport is far more than just hard work. Hard work is a big ingredient. You got to love it. So I've got the talent, the hard work. And then the final part, and to quote Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, there's the opportunity. So talent, work, and opportunity. And for me, there was plenty of opportunity about throughout the different stages of my career. And I was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time many, many times throughout my career. And that I've got to acknowledge as being a huge part of my success. But even if I really wanted to break it down even further, I'd have to say meeting Laura, my wife, in 2000. And like I said earlier at the top of the show, I was a very passionate guy and very emotional and blah, blah, blah. And to have her be my even keel, somebody that has centered me, and that was when, if you look at my performances, there was a real acceleration to going to world number one, and and then hitting all the big professional wins that I did in the US was after meeting Laura. And I think, aligning those with all the other things I've mentioned, I think that was why I had some success.
So it was a matter of alignment, and I'm a big fan of that book. But I think the biggest theme is in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, is just how circumstances can really develop some of these people in ways where they become outliers. It's not like they just put in the 10,000 hours. It's more like they have circumstances that just kind of lined up. And it seems to like this was the case for you in a lot of ways. You had that safety net at home, you had the right trainers, you had the right partner, and you really enjoyed that hard work. And something that you were describing was, there was something about that hard work that perhaps wasn't actually benefiting your training, but you still loved it because it kind of gave you this this resilience. And on the topic of resilience, why do you think you were in favor of that? Why do you think other people shied away from it? Is there something particularly in childhood? Is there something, a lesson that your parents taught you? Like,
great question.
what is that?
Question.
Yeah,
a great question. And it was actually something I was just talking to a friend of mine who's an ex professional hockey player. He played for, 2 Stanley Cup winner, Brad Richards, amazing hockey player. And we were chatting about it the other night. And for me, it's probably a way that I was dealing with the insecurities that I faced as a teenager, and I know a lot of kids going through life right now understand what I'm talking about. High school or middle school, even in the US.
You're talking to me, man. That
Yeah.
was me. Yeah.
And well, I think it's almost all of us. I think you have the people that look like they cruise through high school and they have all the friends and but I still think they're putting on a front. I think that those developing years when we're just trying to figure out who we are and those insecurities and where do I fit in, and I think I carried that with me for a long time. And when I found triathlon when I was 15, 16, and I became known as the triathlete. And this is in the 80s when there was nobody knew really what a triathlon was. But that was what I became. And I think because it helped me through those years, the sport really helped me. I think I embraced it even more because it allowed me to be somebody in my own mind that was relevant. I was comfortable in that person. It also probably made it harder when I wanted to retire because you become the triathlete and it's like, well, hang on, how do I retire? But I think my drive in the sport came from because I loved that I'm not going to shy away from that. I enjoyed the pats on the back. If I did something well and somebody, you win a race or you podium or you have just a good result or you get selected for your first Australian team or whatever it was, there was all these little pats on the back. I'm like, ooh, I don't mind these little bursts of dopamine that I'm getting from people saying that I'm doing something okay. But I think the deeper intrinsic reward I was getting was, I actually like to feel like I'm accomplishing something, that I am doing something of worth. But yeah, it's a big question to unpack as well. I like it though, because it is one that I probably still need to keep talking it out myself because I still haven't fully understood why I love punishing myself so much.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate taking us through that. It definitely seems like it's unbelievably, it's a recent theme to you. It's something that you're now unpacking and starting to really dig into and understand. And maybe we'll get to learn something. Maybe you'll get to learn something on this episode as we record. You know what I mean?
Only through conversation, right? I mean, that's how it unpacks. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I have a follow-up question that maybe that could help us here. It's like, how have you maintained that deeply ingrained part of your identity in other outlets? Meaning, like, of course, as you moved along the spectrum of passion, I'm sure that facilitated this process. As your passion for this sport started to dwindle, maybe you start to understand that you had to maintain this identity, but in somewhere else where you could maybe discover that passion. And so, how have you been able to maintain that identity aspect to this in other places?
Yeah, I think for me, to be honest, when I first retired from the sport, um, I thought I was ready. I thought this is going to be, I'll be fine. But it actually did take a little bit. I went for some high performance jobs with USA and a triathlon and Australia triathlon, and I thought it was going to be no brainer. They were going to give, of course, I'm going to get them, and I didn't get either of them. Like, oh crap, like I think you get to this point that you feel like you deserve it because you've spent all this time. It's like, no, the person that deserves it is the person that makes it happen, right? It's not, you got rewarded. I got rewarded for what I did in that time. And so that was a really good wake up call for me. And then now, as I've sort of transitioned past that and I've become very accepting of who I am now, and I look at myself in three parts. So, I'm a dad with two kids and my family. And so my family is really critical to the equation, and that's who I am. My health and longevity and what's important to keeping my body going, and how do I keep the vitality and everything else in my life. And then finally my work, and working with, like I mentioned earlier, with any question, they're my three parts. And what was fascinating was probably the most exciting part of this last sort of couple of years was getting to know Ed Baker, and then having him see value in me beyond Greg the athlete. He actually saw Greg, the guy that can contribute to building hopefully one of the biggest apps the world's ever seen, right? So it's like he saw more in me, and that value, that value that somebody has. And for a retiring athlete, and again, I was talking with Brad Richards about this, it's interesting how people will value your performances as an athlete, but then as soon as you're done, it's like, okay, there's a new crop, new breed. Like I said, you rent it for a while, and then you kind of, it's a little bit of cast aside. And I'm okay with it. I'm not complaining one bit. I'm just saying that's the reality of being a professional athlete. But then to have somebody value you for that you can contribute at another level on another thing, all of a sudden you feel reinvigorated, and that same kind of energy that you put to sport is now like, okay, it's to this business, it's to working with building the right team, it's building the product, it's whatever you need. And it's a different kind of way of channeling your efforts into something than sport. And sometimes it's infuriating because with sport you can just push yourself harder or whatever. When you're building a business, there's a lot of patience needed, there's all these other kind of things that, as athletes, they're not natural areas we go to. So for me, that's been truly valuable. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but
You
that's
have.
kind of been my
You
process.
have. And as you were answering my question, there was a quote that came up for me. I just looked it up just to make sure. It's from Carl Jung, and he goes, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you." And I bring that up because it's funny, but it's like I bring that up because you're in a position where so much of your identity was tied to this professional athlete, and then you were kind of at a point where like the passion is dying, or maybe it's dwindling. I need to figure out what the next steps are, and you're in a position where now this part of your identity was like, what happens to it? There has to be some kind of skill, some kind of value that you can carry over to the next
Mm.
big thing. And
Yeah.
maybe someone else had to recognize that in you. And I bring this up because I know a lot of people that, for example, like I love to interview people that are the best at what they do, but they did a complete 180 like career shift. Like I've had people on the podcast that are like NBA Hall of Fame coaches that were originally lawyers. Or I had Romero Brito, the artist, and he was originally going to law school and then he became an artist. It's like I have a lot of these 180 shifts, and it's like it comes from a place of a lot of self-awareness, but it also
Mm.
counts to have people around you that are willing to tell you what they see in you, so you can go, you know what? Okay. Because
Yeah.
you can
I,
be lost. You can be very vulnerable. You don't know what's best.
I
You
agree with
think
you.
you have to go back into the Olympics to be a performance coach. And
Mm.
now look at how excited you are about this opportunity.
It's fantastic. There's another good quote that, like I said, I was kind of on the sidelines, for 2016, 2017, 2018, a little bit, just sort of trying to figure it out. And where's my opportunity? And almost sitting there, and Chris Rock put it best, the comedian Chris Rock, and he said, and I'm going to bastardize this a little bit, but I'll try and tell you. And he said, look, my car was always breaking down. And he said, I'll be on the side of the highway, put my thumb out. No one ever stopped. He said, then there was this one time, pissing down rain, and there was an underpass just in front of me, but the car broke down and I had to try and get the car under the underpass. So I decided I'd just forget putting my thumb out. I'm just going to get out and push the car. And as soon as I started pushing, everybody started stopping and helping me push the car.
Wow.
And the point of that story is once you put yourself out there in the world, once people can see that you're trying, once people see that you're giving it a go, it's amazing how people will get on board and try and help you in whatever you want to do. But nobody's just going to come and grab you if you're just sitting at home going, well, where's my opportunity? You need to be out there. Like you with this podcast, there's a vulnerability. You're putting yourself out there. I know how hard it is to get guests on. You write them, go, hey, you want to come on? It's not easy, right? I mean, it's not easy. And people think it's easy. There's a lot to this. We were talking pre-show about the post editing and there's a lot in it. But when I saw you on Instagram, and I'm like, and I think you mentioned something, I was like, I got to help this guy out. Like I get it, right? Because I want to help you push your car. And for me, that's how suddenly life started getting going again. I almost hit this like, where am I going? It's like, oh, here I go again. So that's if anybody takes anything away from this episode, just keep moving. And let people know you're moving and get them on board, because people want to help each other. And especially when they see something, a good cause, or you're trying to achieve something, people will get on board and they will help. It's been fascinating for me to watch. So, yeah.
I think one of the first few things that comes to mind for me is it's like a lot of people online, they start to maybe make content or they start their own brand, and then they ask people to like, hey, like follow me or repost. They ask you to help them, and it's like no. Those people end up getting way low engagement. They don't really make anything of themselves. But until they start to just put in the hard work and you start to see how your help can actually influence them, you're much more driven to help those people. Of course, there's exceptions. Like, someone asks for help, and if you really feel like you're in a position to help, you go and help. But I think that it's when you show that you're making the effort and that you kind of depict how another person's effort can assist, it's like it makes a world of a difference.
But we all want to help each other that are trying to help themselves. It's human nature. And I think that's the beauty of the world we live in now. We can actually see people that are trying to help each other. So I think it's I don't know if it's at a DNA level or whatever it is, but I know that feeling, and I've had it now experienced on my end, and it's come back a thousandfold. So I'm truly appreciative.
Well, I appreciate you recognizing it in me and helping me out. It's
Of course,
it's an honor to be here with you. And let's jump into the subject of visualization, because I thought that was just fascinating. I had a chance to learn that. When I was doing my degree in exercise physiology, we had a whole psychology class on just visualization. And it's like, you had mentioned how back then this was very, very new, a very, very new concept. I'm wondering, how do you visualize? And I can eventually get into, maybe to help paint the picture, make this practical for the audience, I can get into some of the incredible techniques that I've learned through a book that you may be familiar with. It's called Psycho-Cybernetics. It's a very
I've
old
heard
book.
of it, but I haven't read it. But
Basically, it's all about like meditating and visualizing the things that you want to accomplish to the point where your subconscious steers you in the direction necessary to actually accomplish these tasks. And of course, that's what happened. That was the outcome of your training with visualization. So I'm wondering how, throughout the years, how did you start visualizing, and how do you visualize today to accomplish all these incredible things that you want to accomplish?
Yeah, well, I think in sport, it's a fairly easy concept, and I've got to remember that when I talk visualizing for people that maybe aren't athletes and they're just trying to visualize being the hardest job in the world, being a great mum or a great dad. Like it's like this, and being an athlete for me, there was the two ways, as I mentioned, there was the physical and there was the static. So when I talk about the physical type training, it would usually start with the drive down or wherever I was going to do. Say I was going to do a run, and that run might be 10 by 3-minute efforts or 1K efforts or whatever. On the drive down, I would decide what race I'm visualizing, the course, the weather, temperature, time of day, then I would picture the athletes, and I'd list out usually 10 to 20 athletes in my head, but maybe pick 3 to 5 that were going to be the big game players.
But did you ever,
I'd
so
have
I hate to interrupt, but did you ever share this with them? Did you ever tell them, hey, I visualized racing
Oh,
with you?
yes, I
Yeah.
have a story on that, actually. It's quite hilarious. But then I would go down and do my warm up. And in the warm up for me, because it was triathlon, in the warm up, I'd be talking about the swim. There'd be a commentator. So the commentator's in my head, and that commentator would be calling the swim and bike in my warm up. And this is already getting the blood flowing. It's like a heart rate starting to rise just through visualizing. And then once I get to the workout, and I would design my workouts so that they would be great for visualizing. So something like 10 by 3 minutes is actually a great visual workout, because I'd have 1.5 minute recovery. And during that 1.5 minutes, I'd have the commentator come back. Generally, during the 3 minute effort, I'd be punishing so hard, the commentator wasn't that strong, but I'd have an idea of what was going on. And so I would say I'm getting off the bike, I hit my watch and away I go. And it'd be like, okay, Greg Bennett's, 1 minute down from Craig Walton, who's had an epic, swim bike. But Greg's over with Simon Whitfield and Bevan Doherty, and it's a big group getting off the bike together. And they're just going incredibly fast, whatever. And then that'd be the one. And then I'd finish that first one and be like, okay, they're 1K in, they've taken 15 seconds out of Craig Walton. Simon Whitfield's fallen off the back, but Hamish Carter and Greg Bennett are now starting. And I would plan the next kilometer. And then I would kind of go through 1K, 1K, 1K. And then, I'd always make sure I won with my
a critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. I mean, look, every now and then I would visualize. Actually, there was quite, because I was always fatigued. You've got these mass training blocks that you'd be in, and you turn up, and my legs would be shot, and just feeling awful. So then I would change the visualization to be like, "This has been the hardest bike in the world. These guys are all fried," and I'd slow down everybody around me, right, just to make sure I could still win. It was like, and I'd still get through my workout, and so that was kind of one way of doing it, that it got me into a heightened arousal state for that physical training. And then the other would be more just lying on the massage table. And, for years I had my good mate, Marcus Mejias. He would come over most afternoons for a half hour massage for years and years. At least 5 times a week I was getting kind of rub downs, and he was just really awesome. But I would often just lie on that table, facing the hole. And if I had a race coming up in a few weeks' time or whatever, it was getting closer, I would run through it. And for me, that was all the way through, from swim, bike, run, to the point that I could make myself sweat profusely on the table. And Marcus would know that, like, you're getting deep into your visualizing state. I'd be like, yeah. And he'd know not to interrupt. And generally I'd go through a whole race in, say, 20 minutes or so. But I could see and feel everything in my body moving without it becoming muscle tense, but just more. I just really believe that I'm like, if I can think about it with this much emotion, I'm affecting my hormones, which obviously is affecting my physiology. So it has to be working. Like, people would always laugh, is there a way to train for a race without actually having to train? Well, visualizing, I'm not saying you can replace it, but it's a powerful, powerful tool. And even like you said, on the subconscious level, that it carries over into then everything you do beyond the massage table. You get off, and the way you're thinking, the way you're eating, hydrating, everything becomes about that performance in a few weeks' time. And then always the visualizing the night before a race. So I would go through and go, okay, I'm waking up at, if it was New York Triathlon, which started at 5:45 a.m. on a Sunday morning, I'd be like, okay, I'm getting up at 2:45 a.m. and this is what it's going to look. And I would step through every tiny little thing that I could think of. And it wasn't always perfect, but I would go through that visual, and all the way through to the warm-up, all the way through to the gun going off, doing the whole race, all the way to the end. I'd do that one right through, and then we're like, okay, time to go to sleep, not allowed to think about it anymore. And generally I'd sleep pretty well if I did a really good job. So they were the two big ways I did it with sport, sort of the static, lying in a place, and the one when you're out there actually feeding into it on a constant basis.
I mean, this is just, you are so gifted in being able to paint that picture and train your physiology, and you literally are engaging in training. I mean, from the book that I mentioned is an old book. They mentioned studies from back in the 1920s where people are literally thinking about the training and about shooting the perfect free
Mm.
throw in basketball, and how those people ended up making just as many shots then as the people that actually went in and trained physically. And it's like, that was one example. Those were older studies, but then all the way up to my classes in psychology and physiology, like, you get to see the influence that visualization has on like neural circuitry and muscle memory.
Yeah, that'd be so cool to
And
study that.
it's
I'm jealous.
yeah, no,
That's very
it's
cool.
super cool, but it's like,
Yeah.
one thing is learning about it. The next thing is like hearing about this. The way that you're describing it, you're sweating. Other people can tell that you're in this phase. You
But
know,
we can all do that. It's like I've taken up tennis the last couple of years, right? It's something Laura and I can do. We can sneak out while we've got little kids so we can go play tennis together. And I'm loving, and we're quite competitive. So we basically will warm up for about 20 hits and then we're like, okay, let's play a game. Let's go. And because that's what makes tennis fun for us. It's like we dive for every ball and and there's some days where Laura's just like punishing me, right? I'm two games down, and it's just like, and I'm like, oh, I get to practice visualizing again. I get to practice word affirmations and turning that negative thought back into, I belong. I can do this. I'm athletic. I'm powerful. Bend the knees. I can see myself in the next shot really hitting winners, forehand winners, or slicing a back, whatever it is. And suddenly you just start with, and I can turn it around and suddenly we're 2 games equal or whatever. It's like, I get it. I get what Nadal and Federer and tennis is a brutal sport like that, because the game starts after every point. It's stop, start. And you have these moments where you get to collect your brain again and go, even if you're down 2-0, and it's a 5-set tournament, you can turn it around. And you've seen it time and time again with Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer. Have you ever seen guys like this that can just keep
yeah,
turning it around?
yeah.
That is some of the toughest mental training you could ever imagine. Don't get me wrong, they're physically gifted, but the way they can come from behind and turn that negative to a positive stance is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting those sort of like downloads between sets, and the way that you were doing it while you were getting a massage. I mean, I don't know how long the massage was, but I imagine 1 hour,
Yeah.
2 hours, 3 hours, and it's like you're spending that time learning. Like, a lot of people, I think, in this day and age, are so preoccupied with like the notifications on their phones and their email and their social media or texting, and it's like they don't give themselves the opportunity
We're
to,
always on, mate. We're
yeah.
always on.
Imagine if we took the time to just reflect in those, just for a moment, for the next step in the day, the next step at work, the next step in our project, the next step in our brand.
It's critical. It's critical. I was talking to Dr. Tommy Wood, who you should have on your show. He's come on mine a number of times, and he's a good friend, and he's just absolutely brilliant. And we were talking about how life these days, in its simplest form, is really easy, right? We're comfortable. We all have what we need. But unlike 150 years ago, we never turn off. We are always on, and that's our kryptonite right now. Is that we're looking at screens, we have things dinging us, binging us, dinging it. Our brains are always on, to the point that we're never grounded. We're never stopping. Whereas 150 years ago, you got your food, you got your harvest. Okay, that was a lot of work. It was very stressful, but now let's decompress. Let's decompress fully. And they would fully decompress for a while. I just don't see us grounding ourselves and decompressing as much as we have. And the way I'm sort of doing it now with my life is, I'm often on these screens from 5 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. I'll usually do an hour break during the day there, and usually try and have lunch with the kids. But come 5 o'clock, I have dinner with the family for 15 minutes. We go straight up to the beach and we walk and play on the beach every single night without fail for a good hour. And it's the most grounding experience. No phones, and I've told everybody at work, it's not a time, you do not get me, and you do not, I'm not getting back to you during that time. And it's the most wonderful experience, because it's that, okay, ground yourself, release, let go. Because that's why we're getting, we see the kids now, and it's like so hard for them to just let go. Man, it's an area that we need to really help each other with, because these phones and screens are addictive and very helpful, very useful. Use them, but don't let them control you. You got to control them, and you've got to be able to take control of your own life by finding those times you can be down and decompress and not have your brain on as much as it is.
Yeah, the reason why I think I love being entrepreneurial and doing my own thing and being my own boss is because I've realized just how much of my peak performance happens when I'm able to truly invest in my creative process, meaning taking time off. Whereas
Hmm.
otherwise, if I were doing anything else for anyone else and had to work on someone else's time, I would completely like compromise my abilities. You know, it's like I get to organize myself now, and I'm sure you appreciate this because you know you do the same thing. So does you
Hmm.
know you give yourself that time to reflect, to visualize, to prepare, and so when you do
And the
pull that
great
trigger,
ideas come in, don't
yeah,
they? The great
you
ideas
get
come in.
insane
Yeah,
downloads.
yeah,
Like I've had
yeah.
my best ideas. I'll tell you, there's 4 places where I have my best ideas. One is in the shower.
Yeah.
Two is while I'm driving.
Mhm.
Three is when I'm about to go to bed and I'm just laying in my bed. And then four is when I wake up in the morning and I meditate.
Mhm.
And those are four things that are critical to my day every single day. Like my
Go
girl,
for a
yeah,
walk on the beach if
or
you
a
can
walk, or
for
the walk. Yeah, yeah,
10 minutes with
yeah,
no headphones, no kids, no wife, nothing, just on your own,
yeah.
and it's amazing the stuff that comes in.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
that's number 5 is whenever I'm doing an
Yeah.
activity, like I had to give up cycling unfortunately because it just got way too dangerous in Miami.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
no.
Miami it
Indoor
it
only.
was
I'm the
crazy.
same. Indoor only.
Yeah,
Yep.
but, when I was on the bike, especially if I was solo on the bike, I would get some amazing, amazing downloads, and now when I go for a walk on the beach, it's similar, but I think
Mhm.
that for the day to day, what really helps me the most is meditating outside with some
Mm.
sunlight and, closing my eyes, and I kinda have a visual of what I'm gonna do that day, and I take myself through what I'm gonna do. So, for example, today's meditation, I visualized having you on the podcast. I visualized the meeting that I had, a bunch of different things, and I clearly visualize what is it going to be like? How am I going to be? How am I feeling today? And how am I going to use it to my advantage? What am I going to,
Mm.
if I'm going to take any supplements, or am I going to do exercise before or after this? And it's like I organize my day according to what works best and the kind of downloads that I receive, and it's been just fundamental for my personal development, personal growth, and opportunities that I've had. And I'm sure you can appreciate that. And what I want to kind of point out to the people tuning in, it's like you don't have to be a triathlete or
No, no, no,
a
no, no.
World Series. You can get your downloads. Just give
Yeah.
yourself the opportunity.
Yes, exactly. And I think I love your 5 things that you pointed out there because I think they're all so valuable that it's like, don't blast music on while you're in the
Yeah.
shower. Use these times to not have anything coming in. And what I've been doing a lot in my morning workouts, which these days is only about 45 minutes in the morning, is, for the first half, I kind of would do an audio book, usually one to do with product development or something, I'm trying to learn drinking through a fire hose in this new tech space. So I use it as a time to learn. But then I also take out the earbuds, leave my phone and the earbuds at home. And then I'll go for my little jog walk for 15, 20 minutes just to go, okay, it's not about work now. This is my time to decompress again. And I think these little moments in time not only make me better at work, not only are good for my health, I'm a better dad and I'm a better husband because you turn up. You're now ready again. You need these they're like little micro reboots, like, and the creativeness comes in. They're so valuable.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, and I'm someone that's I'm always looking to learn more. So I'm listening to podcasts. I'm consuming content, and all the time. Like it's like any chance I get, I want to learn. But I've realized that to do the things that only I can do, the things that I can do best, I have to give myself the opportunity to download what's unique to me. If I'm always consuming
Yeah,
someone else's content, those aren't original ideas anymore. Maybe it's
exactly.
supplying me with certain ideas, but then to integrate it and to create my own, I have to give myself the opportunity to self reflect, and that's
Love it.
where I visualize.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's fantastic.
yeah, I mean, man, I'm sure we can have several episodes on just the topic of visualization. Uh, I wanted to, I was curious. You mentioned you've spoken a lot about your wife. How did you guys discover each other, and how did you know that dating dating a triathlete was the best decision? I know a lot of people that I've met personally who are so into their field, they go, I don't want to learn any more about this. I want to date someone that's a complete polar opposite. And the reason I bring this up is because I think it has a lot to do with your personal health and wellness, as you've described. And for the young people out there that are looking for their significant other, what kind of tips can you give us in that realm?
Yeah. Well, I think It's funny, Laura and I have been together for 22 years now. We have a 2 and a 4-year-old kid. I'm the old dad in the playground, but it's like we wouldn't have had it any other way. We got to have our kind of life and careers together before kids, and now we have kids together. And I had dated several women before Laura, and it's all about sort of figuring out what you do and don't like in people, right? That's the whole point of dating, is kind of going, what kind of person am I after? For me, when I met Laura, it was just easy. It was just easy the very first time. Obviously, she's a beautiful woman and had all that attractive side of it, which, without sounding too shallow, I mean, or cheap or whatever you want to call me, there is something about the attractiveness of somebody, and
100%, no doubt.
and I was like, oh, she's pretty hot, and I think we never really dated because she came. I was living and training in Canada, Victoria, Canada at the time, and she'd come up to do a bit of a training camp for a couple of weeks, and I think she was injured on the first day, so we just ended up hanging out, and it was so easy in the sense that I remember just going out for coffee, and she just made me laugh. Right at the end of the day, it was very simple, very easy. She then went back to Florida, and we decided to meet in Chicago, and we kind of and then I said, I'm going to Australia to train, and she said, maybe I'll come down there as well. And because we were traveling athletes, we ended up moving in together right away. We'd never gone on a date. We just kind of hung out in this training camp in Victoria, but it was one of those where there was never a question of, will we make it? Are we the right fit? It was kind of like we just were. And this is where I don't like to give any advice on this, if I must be honest, because if you want to talk about one of the greatest gifts I was just given, and I feel privileged to have been just given it, whether you call it fate or whatever it was to get this magnificent wife that I have, right? And I, it always surprises me when I wake up each morning and she's still here, because I'm like, wow, that's pretty awesome. I've been truly blessed. And in terms of making a relationship work as both athletes, that just takes a lot of communication. We communicate as much as we can. It's hard when you're both really tired, and it's not to say it's all roses. Our relationship hasn't been all roses, of course. No relationship is, and every relationship takes a lot of work. But once you find the one that you say, okay, this is it. It's like, well, this is what I'm going to work. This is my goal for the rest of my life, is to work on this. It's not work on it for a few years. It's,
I think the takeaway here is you were just able to be yourselves because there wasn't an expectation to sort of be the
yeah, I like
couple
that. I
or
like that.
to
Yeah.
have to make adjustments. It's like you guys are both athletes. You guys are both doing what you do as individuals, and that kind of mutual respect and things just making sense, and of course a level of attractiveness was what brought it together, right?
Yeah. Well, I think Laura's described it really well. She's like, look, we were good athletes before we got together, and we became great athletes after, right? And because I think we
Yeah.
had that, I brought this overwhelming passion and enthusiasm and love for what we do. And it's not to say Laura didn't love what she did, but I was probably brought this next level energy, and she brought this level-headed, rational, control the ego, control the expectation, analytical way of looking at it. And we balanced each other up. And I think having each other for that, having somebody that could be at home that understands the lifestyle you want to live, because it's a lifestyle. Our job was as much a sport or an occupation as it was a lifestyle. And so when you've got somebody on board that fully understands the importance of sleep and hydration and nutrition and bodywork and biomechanics and mental health and general health and all of these aspects, they understand it because they're wanting it for themselves as well. So you're growing together of building this lifestyle of going, how do we optimize the lives that we have? And we worked very, very hard on that. And our conversations have been a lot about that. I mean, even now, I don't know how much money we've just spent on tests for our full health workup. It's like, here we go. It's like probably $5,000 each on just health. And that sounds like so much money to go get testing on health. And I'm like, well, most people spend that on a car every year. And I was like, so for us, it's a priority. We don't debate these things. It's like, what do we need to just keep trying to do the best we can to optimize these beautiful things we have, which are called life. And it's like, how do we have this life just be the best it can be and squeeze as much out of it as possible.
Yeah, so I want to highlight how you just mentioned like you spent this much money on these kinds of tests, and at the end of the day, what you're pursuing is health optimization. But think about how individual health optimization is. So it just kind of goes back to, you know, you guys are so proudly individual. Yes, you guys are in a similar realm, but in your realm to be optimized, it's such an individual approach. And so from the get go, you guys understand that
Yep.
you guys have to treat yourself first as individuals, be true to yourselves. But now when you
Yep.
discover how that can work synergistically and that you appreciate each other, you bring something new to the table, and all of a sudden you have this beautiful relationship that respects the individual components. And
Yeah.
that to me is everything, because I think a lot of people are so worried about, what do I have to change about myself to be for that person? What is that person? What do I need to change about that person so that they
Mm.
can be better for me? And I think from the get go, they set these false expectations. They kind of pretend as if this person is the ideal person. And I see a lot of that in Miami because there's a lot of attractive people here, and we try to
Mm.
like cater to those people. And it's like, no, 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 no. That's a bonus. But if you can
Mm.
respect each other as individuals, come together and make something even better, that to me is like top.
That and I think you just nailed it. If you're with somebody and they're not making you a better person, that person's not right for you. If they're making you feel less, if they're making you feel no better, and you're not growing or feel like you're going anywhere, then get out.
Yeah.
Your partner is there to help you get more out of yourself, to help you recognize things in you that you haven't seen before. We often play probably once every 2 years, in fairness, a game where we just sit down and we point out each other's strengths. What are your great attributes? People don't do that. People are very good at pointing out each other's weaknesses, things you could work on. And look, fine, we need to work on a few things, but I'm all about optimizing our strengths. And so to sit down, and I think that was even one of the reasons I started a podcast in the beginning. Laura said, you're quite okay at conversation, and you don't mind to talk, and all of these things that she empowered me by telling me what my strengths were. Well, that's what a partner should be able to see in you and tell you and help you find, optimize those strengths within you. And I think if you can find somebody like that, then I think you're going to have a great journey and a great partnership.
My girlfriend's gonna love this. My partner's gonna love this because that's exactly what you're describing is what we found, and it's a matter of time now to stand the test of time, so to speak. But we are, you know, we are all about the individual and how important it is for us to grow as individuals. But coming together, we make something beautiful. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm gonna play that game with her next time I see her. Just outlining our strengths. I'm sure it's
It's so great.
yeah.
It's so great. Nobody takes the time to just stop and pause and just say, I'm just going to tell you a few things that I think you do really well.
Yeah. And
And
so
it's really
making the transition from this unique approach to health optimization, you guys are spending a lot of time, energy, and money to continue to be optimized throughout your lives. But I'm wondering, if you were to look back to the early triathlon and athletic days, what are some themes that you go, man, I don't know why we were doing that back then. That's totally not what we would do today. Because nowadays, like, you go on social media, you go on YouTube, you see all these trends in diet and fitness, and you're just like, man, that sounds really, really cool. Next year, it's like, how is anybody doing that? So I know that you mentioned, we were having a conversation before the podcast about some crazy workouts in the 90s and, brutal hard work and other themes that perhaps today, you kind of like just look back and laugh at. What were some things that stand out?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. It's, where we are today, first and foremost, is when we look at high performance sport, we look at the wellness of an athlete, right? Sleep, nutrition, hydration, their mental health, their general health, biomechanics, all of that is huge priority. And then we do the physical training as a part of that. During the 80s and 90s, it was all about physical training. And if you talked about the other stuff, you were weak. I mean, it
Wow.
was that simple. It was either strong or weak, right? I mean,
Wow.
it was, and I'm including, we never drank water in training. I'm talking 2 hour, two and a
As I
half
pick
hour
up my
hard
glass.
runs.
Yeah.
As you pick up your water, we were dehydrated. We were we were fueling completely wrong. It was all about carbohydrates for the longest time. They'd have carbohydrate parties, and it was just the biggest thing we had going wrong was we had egos attached to the physical training, and whoever works the hardest will be the greatest, full stop. And so An example for me is I remember getting ready for the 2000 Olympic Games trials, and I was with my coach, and it was early on a Saturday morning, and at the gym upstairs in Christchurch, New Zealand, where we were training, was just above the 50-meter pool. This is before the earthquake, and it was a beautiful complex, but it was a kind of a dark and dingy gym, and there were just two treadmills set up side by side in the gym, and it was just me and my coach, and I got up there, and he said, Greg, I want you to do 35 seconds on, 25 seconds off, which you straddle the treadmill. With the 35 seconds on, we'll set the treadmills to 22.5 kilometers an hour, so about just over 14 miles an hour, and at 1 degrees, up. So basically sprinting for 35 seconds and jumping off for 25 seconds. And he said, I want you to do that until you drop. And I was like, okay. And the reason there were two treadmills there is because, this was summer in New Zealand. It was getting pretty hot, and there was no air conditioning or anything. And I was going to sweat in too much on one, and I'd have to swap backwards and forwards and let the other one dry off. So I was kind of like, okay, I guess I'll do this workout. Never done one where I'd just do it till I can't do anymore. And so away I went. And the first sort of probably 50 to 70 were really tough. I was just struggling to find a rhythm. But then I just hit this state of flow. And you hear this with athletes, this ability. And I think Csikszentmihalyi was the guy that referenced it as state of flow. But that ability where you just go into this zone and you just don't even know, it's just so robotic. Anyway, I just kept going. And for 2.5 hours, I just kept doing 35 seconds on, 25 seconds off. And finally, Brett, my coach, who was in the corner, put down his newspapers and he said, okay, Greg, that's enough. I'll see you in a couple of hours for swim training. And so it was basically just shy of a marathon of doing sprints on and off. It was about 38 kilometers worth of sprinting on and off. Epic workout, absolutely fun to talk about now. Was it the right thing to do in terms of performing, I don't really think so. But I wore it like this badge of honor. And I've got to add that throughout the many years there in the mid to late 90s, I was I often, was urinating blood and they call it exercise-induced hematuria. Is that how they do it? You're a physiologist.
Yeah, rhabdo.
Yeah, rhabdo or whatever. And look, but I wore that as a badge of honor. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm probably doing something poor to my health. It was like, well, if
This
I'm
is
willing
how hard
to,
I worked.
exactly. And if word gets out that, oh, I'm willing to work that hard, then surely everybody's going to cave under my, some kind of stand. It's just like, I look back and I'm like, you idiot, and this is where the athletes of today are just being coached so much smarter. I've had some other great athletes on my show. Michael Klim, who was probably one of Australia's greatest swimmers and multiple gold medals at the Olympic Games and the greatest swimmer of the 98 World Championships, 100, 200 meter freestyle, absolutely phenomenal. And he was just, he's the same as me. He's kind of looking back at the work he did in the 90s under his coach, Gennady Turetsky, who was also Popov's coach. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here. But the kind of work that they did, 100-kilometer weeks, consistent 100-kilometer weeks in the pool, 100 kilometers in the pool, 60 miles a week in the pool to swim a race that takes 49 seconds. And then, the health issues that he's had to deal with and everything post that is really quite extraordinary because we really just destroyed ourselves. So right now I'm sitting here as a 50-year-old, retired, 6-7 years, just going, okay, what do I need to do to just firstly look after the certain things that I've got going on, because I did damage myself all of those years and nothing too major. But okay, how do I support my system better now than I did for all those years, especially in the 90s? But when Laura and I got together, we were a lot better, but still probably not perfect in our overall health.
Yeah, so I one of the biggest themes that I took away from my degree is that the nature of the stimulus dictates the nature of the adaptation. Like the specific way you train is a specific way you're going to perform. And this goes down to the substrate utilization level and every other level that you can imagine. And so it's like, I understand that there's an ego kind of thing, an ego component, and there's like a mental grit and resilience component to just doing something that's way beyond, way beyond. But from an athletic perspective, if you're doing a specific athletic effort, why would you train any other way other than exactly the way you need to train for that sport and build up your ego through other means? Like, hey, look at how specifically I'm doing this, and look at how well I'm sleeping and eating, and look at XYZ. But it's like, why would you do that? Why would you
Well,
do that?
it's interesting, and look, don't get me wrong. I think in all those years of that really brutal hard work that I did in the late 90s, I learned a lot about myself as an athlete, and I grew tremendously. It's like I talk about that peering over the edge and going beyond. The work we were doing, when I talk about that kind of work on the treadmill, obviously it wasn't it was very specific to the way I wanted to race. At 22K an hour is the speed of my legs that I wanted to be running, a 28, 29 minute 10K. And so it was specific in that sense, and I'd been doing it for a long, long time. I think we often did very dramatic workouts so the world would hear about them. But when Laura and I started coaching ourselves in 2004 onwards, there's a lot of workouts in there that I don't share, that were, my clothing, my sweat stank because of my muscle breakdown. That really acidic. I was off.
Exertional rhabdomyolysis.
That's the word. That's exactly it. Thank you. I'm going to leave the experts talk about that. I had that just constantly, just breaking down myself. And we can go into body image issues. We'd always talk about, women, from us men in endurance sports. I remember taking a photo in January in Noosa, Australia, and I was in my swimsuit, and someone said, "Oh, let's grab a photo of you and Laura or whatever." I'm like, "Oh, please don't take a photo. I'm overweight, I'm fat, and this is awful." And I saw the photo not so long ago, the exact photo that was taken probably 15 years ago, and I'm like, "Oh my God, I thought I was fat." And it's like there's nothing on me. Like it's skeletal almost. I can see all my ribs, and it's just like I'm like, wow. I actually really struggled with that as well. So, in terms of, I'm kind of laying it all out there for you. It's like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it always sounds impressive with an intro of professional athlete, Olympics, and all of this stuff. But there's a lot of it's not all roses back there, and the issues that you hear, they're very real. But don't get me wrong, I wouldn't change a thing either. I kind of go, the fact is, if you want to perform at the highest level in endurance sport, you can't be heavy. I don't care who you are. If you're carrying weight in the wrong areas, it's going to affect your performance. And this is where coaches have to tread a really fine line when they work with athletes these days, because how do you present that without?
And particularly with women, I don't want to call women out, but it's the truth.
You got to be careful, but there's a way to do it. And look, weight should be trained off. And if an athlete you're coaching, a woman in particular, is not able to get it off, then you need to look at her sleep. You need to look at her hormones and her diet. There's more going on, because if you're training 20 to 30 hours a week, it's not about somebody overeating. You almost can't eat enough at that point. Your caloric burn is through the roof. So if they're retaining weight for some reason, there's other things that a good coach should be able to help with, and say, let's look at your hormones. Let's look at your sleep. Without pointing out that, it's a fragile area. You got to be careful.
Yeah, there's a lot of really incredible female physiologists and doctors and experts. For example, I had a woman. Her name is Kayla Osterhoff, PhD in neuropsychophysiology, and we talk about like the female biorhythm and how you need to pay attention to that to determine when women should be training more hardcore, when they should be emphasizing sleep a little more, or maybe even like carb cycling, when it makes sense according to where you are along your cycle. I know Stacy Sims is another incredible, incredible figure in that space. Her book Roar, and a lot of her content since Roar, because that was published in 2016. We've come a long way since then. But there's a lot of incredible women out there that kind of teach these younger athletes what they need to do to mind their physiology, because between men and women, we're so different. A lot of women just train themselves like as if they were men, and it can affect all kinds of things
very differently. I agree.
Yeah, I have a few remaining questions. I know we're we've been at this for some time. I definitely want to do a part 2 in person now, knowing that
Yeah,
you're
let's
local
do
to
it.
me. I'm wondering how, once you stopped competing, can you describe the difference? Can you paint the picture as far as how your nutrition changed? Because when you're training for hours and hours and hours, can you kind of describe how much carbohydrate you were consuming then and how much you consume, now?
Yeah, it was we. It's funny though. I mean, you actually become quite efficient at movement, and your energy, as much as we would train, 20 to 30 hours a week on average, you become quite efficient at that movement. That your caloric burn wasn't off the chart. And because we were training all the way throughout the day, we didn't have big breakfasts and we didn't have big lunches. We kind of would snack because you don't want it coming back up. And so our dinners, we would always eat early, often by 4:35. Where big salad bowl type things each of just whatever we were eating at that time, and just massive portions at dinner, several hours before we would go to bed. And I mean, Laura's metabolism was higher than mine. She was just like churning it over, but mine was my metabolism was actually not super high. I could do a fair bit of work without burning through a lot of calories, so I was pretty fortunate there. But when we retired, it was nice to not feel hungry as much and have to worry about the food. But my wife, as soon as she's had, two babies and is breastfeeding, has taken nutrition to another level. It's like now she's growing two little people through breast milk. Well, now they're off that, but she's really. I mean, if you want to talk about nutrition and understanding the gut biomes and everything else, I really go off her lead now these days. My focus is obviously on my work and everything else. So I'll come out at dinner and at 4:45 when dinner's served or whatever, and I've got a huge bowl of something. Well, not huge these days; it's just a normal portion size. But in terms of nutrition as a whole, we eat very whole. We try and mix everything up. Everything's about the gut biome, what feeds the gut. That's what we really focus on. Obviously gluten mostly free. Really no sugar in the house. We really don't touch sugar anymore. I don't have a craving for it like I used to. As an athlete, I crave you.
Yeah.
You wanted that simple sugars. You needed that. Now I don't crave it. I have a little bit of dark chocolate each day, but I've never been a big coffee drinker, so I have one coffee a day. I'm sipping the lion's mane mushroom tea.
Nice. Yeah. Four
I love
Sigmatic.
that. Four Sigmatic. They sponsored my show for a while,
No
and
way.
I sip on that every now and then, and but otherwise, honestly it's fairly simple, But it's nice to be at a point. My point of saying that is I don't crave things like I used to, and that was always like, always felt like rubbish. You wanted to eat these things, but you also had a bonfire when you were an athlete. You had a bonfire in your gut that was just like, could almost eat anything. And now I'm probably more, I can notice how things affect me a lot more. And so you're kind of like, I'm not going to eat that cookie because I want to sleep well tonight. Or things actually, I notice those things. Whereas an athlete, it's just like, you could do what you want
You
almost.
notice how it influences aspects beyond like the physical performance, how it influences like your mood and your mindset.
Oh,
Whereas as an athlete, it's like,
big time.
as long as I have the calories that are going to keep me going, like that's what matters. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
When I started, I really only cycled for about just over a year. I got like sucked into it. Like I went headfirst into road cycling. Never thought, like, typically right there'd be a bike hanging behind me. I don't know if you can
Yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah.
I'm actually selling the bike today. Like today's I'm getting paid for the bike. Coincidentally, yeah,
Oh.
it's a shame. I am getting a gravel bike, so I'm gonna,
Oh, well, there you go.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna keep doing that. You see, I'm not on the road,
yeah, yeah,
but anyway,
yeah.
I jumped headfirst into it, and I started to, applying the knowledge that I gained from exercise physiology and nutrition. It's like I leveled up very quickly in the world of cycling, very very quickly. I started going with the hardest groups, fastest groups, started getting sucked in, and that's when I was like, previous to that, I would never take like sports drinks or too much coffee, and I started taking the Tailwind stuff and just like loading my water bottles with sugar and like sugar, gel packs, gel packs.
Yeah.
And I started to perform unlike I've ever seen before. But then when I wasn't cycling, I had this craving for sugar that was
Yes.
like, and I would just kind of
Yeah.
go up and go down. Like
It's an addiction.
brain
It's an
fog and then
addiction.
crash. And
Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
goodness, like I
No,
feel like I wrecked
we
my
would
gut
get to the point
microbiome.
we'd play it around with it, be like, we would go, "You wanna go on a sugar high together?" We'd treat it like a drug. We
Wow.
would say, "You wanna go on a sugar high?" I'd be like, "Yeah, let's eat these together," laughing our heads off for half an hour, and
Yeah.
then be like, "Yeah, but we're gonna crash you, right?" And we're like, "Yep,
Yeah.
crash over here." But recognizing what it's doing to you is a really good place to work with any addiction, right? If you
Yeah.
can understand what mood or how it's like me. If you say, Greg, let's eat dinner at 7:30 at night, I know I'm not sleeping well
Oh
that night.
yeah. Yeah.
I I know it. If you say let's or even a drink, you say you want to go. I like a couple of beers every now and then. Not going to lie, but I'm a day drinker because the nights hurt me more than anything. I can have a couple of beers with you at 2 in the afternoon and still get a reasonable night's sleep. You say let's have a beer at 7:30 at night. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be wrecked for the whole night.
Yeah, for me,
Yeah,
it was like red wine. I had red. I enjoy it, but for me, I was like, oh, the bonus is it's like investing in longevity. You have the resveratrol, the polyphenols, and then I started to see how it influenced my biometrics because I track with the BioStrap. I track my biometrics overnight, and it was like
yeah,
wrecking my HRV and my deep sleep percentage.
yeah.
And I was like, man, in the name of longevity, I think sleep is probably a little more important. And then, you know, and
There's always one, whether
yeah,
it be the resveratrol or whatever it is, and I was like, yeah, well, I don't know. You can take that in tablet form and
yeah,
everything.
you can get resveratrol from grapes. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
and then it was the early dinners. Like one of the biggest changes that I made over the past few years to sleep better, feel better, perform better. It's like just having earlier dinner. Like if more
yeah,
people start eating dinner early, this world would be a better place.
yeah. I
It's
agree.
that dramatic.
Agree. We love the 5 o'clock dinner, and then go, like I said, go down the beach for an hour or whatever. And honestly, if you're really hungry later, maybe I'd have a piece of toast or something. But generally, the early dinner, we've been doing it forever, but everybody knows you don't call the Bennetts after 8 because it's
Yeah,
like the house
yeah.
the house is gone. We're all in bed and asleep. Everyone's like, "What time? I love the question actually. What's your morning routine? And for me, the morning routine is kind of erroneous unless you get the night routine right.
Oh
And
yeah.
so,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we're all in bed asleep by 8:45.
Yeah.
Like, and
What
it's
I
like the
say is
morning looks
like,
after itself.
no matter how good your morning routine is, it's never gonna outweigh a poor night of sleep. Like
Exactly.
people
Exactly.
glorify it's crazy because all these like CEOs and whatever they go, oh yeah, team no sleep, and then they have their crazy morning routines, and it's just like just do the opposite. Just
Yeah.
do the
Get the night right, get the evening right, and I guarantee you, like for me, I never wake up with an alarm. I get up between 4 and 5, whatever it is. I get a beautiful couple of hours before the kids get up, and I can get a bunch of work done on the computer. I'm not gonna lie, I go have my coffee on the computer. That's the first thing I do. I don't run out the door and do an activity. Laura does. She goes and does her activity first, and she comes home, and I get to go do my activity, breakfast with the family, and then into the day of work from 9 o'clock onwards. But I never want to tell people my morning routine without telling them that, yeah,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sound
yeah,
asleep. I panic if it's after 9 and I'm like, ah.
yeah, yeah. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And before we get off here, I have just one more question. Is there overall, how do you think your knowledge of your physiology has helped you stay and maintain this optimized, healthy life? Going back to the name of this podcast, Know Your Physio. It's clear to me that you have this gifted visceral awareness of your body and your mind. Do you think that everyone should get to know their physiology a little better in the pursuit towards optimal health?
Well, yes. I think first and foremost, we should have it in the schools, and kids should know everything about their body, right? I mean, it's like that to me it should be at the educational level. The fact that it's not, okay, let's deal with it. The best thing I would suggest is surround yourself with a good team of people, and that includes whether you're using a physiologist or chiropractor or nutritionalist, or build your health team, build your team. I'm all about teams. A lot of my learning, yeah, it became through self-experimentation, a lot of it, but I also had great team of people around me, whether it be my massage therapist, Marcus Mejias, or my chiropractor down here, Alex Keith, chiropractor in Portland, Oregon, Dr. Ted Forkham in Australia. I have all these people that have been educating me for 30 years. Now, when it comes to, I've got a little niggle, I know how to use, Graston tools or whatever they want to call them these days, how to scrape. I know all about dry needling, and I can dry noodle different. I won't dry noodle my thoracic or anything, but I know how to do some basic dry needling. I know how to, so I can do basic maintenance very well. I still like to go to a chiropractor every now and then if I feel like my C1 is out and I need an adjustment. I can sense that it's not right. I'm getting headaches or whatever. I can sense these things, but I also got to mention that I'm far from perfect either. I'm not some kind of specimen that we should all look to. I've got plenty. I've put on a few pounds since sitting behind this computer, working a lot more than I'd like, and that's something I'm going to have to, And I think that my point is in saying that is we're all a work in progress, right? And you just want to keep learning more about yourself. Be good to yourself. You're not going to be perfect. There is no such thing as perfect. Just try and be a little bit better each day. And every now and then you're going to have days where you step a few steps backward because it's life, right? It's not just a constant even curve. It's like the stock market, isn't it? It's like all over the place. And I think, being good to yourself is probably the most important thing. Try and create these habits, these daily habits. They will become easier. That's the whole point of a habit. Just keep turning up, keep trying to do those things over and over again. And it's amazing how, 50 days in or whatever the time amount is that the habit is starting to form. It's like, oh, it's quite easy to stay on top of this nutrition or this hydration or this sleep or whatever else it is, or this activity. So yeah, I'm blessed to have been able to have a career in a lifestyle sport like triathlon. I get to learn my health. And now as I look for the next 30 to 40 years that I might have left, if I'm fortunate, I just want to try and optimize the years that I have left. And, that's why I'm, working with a lot, building my new team now of trying to go, how do we keep this body going?
Oh, thank you so much, Greg. And I think the last thing I want to highlight here is just how important it is to be your own commentator.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got someone in my head the whole time,
Yeah.
mate.
Awesome. Hey, Greg, where can
Yeah.
people find you?
Well, on Instagram, the Greg Bennett Show, which is the name of my podcast. I'm a little bit active on there. You can even go check out Any Question. You can download that on your app, either iOS or Android. And I'm on there as an expert in the triathlon channel. We have loads of experts in the health channel, and we're building out cycling, and we have all the world's greatest swimmers. Actually, our swimming channel is just off the chart. So if you're into swimming, go listen to Caleb Dressel and Ryan Murphy and some of the greatest swimmers in the world, and swim coaches answering questions on Any Question. First hour is free, so you don't need to do anything. After that, it is a subscription-based model, but most of that revenue goes back to all the experts that are answering questions. So,
Wow.
go check that out. Twitter I am on also. I think that's just called Greg Bennett Show. I don't think there's a "the" in front of it. But otherwise, yeah, reach out, anybody.
Awesome.
Love to hear from you.
Greg,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Such an honor to
Thanks for
host you,
having me,
and I'm
Andres.
looking forward to the next conversation.
I appreciate it, mate.